Tibetan Book of the Dead, space between a death and a rebirth. It's what I called the memory body that was constructed slowly over 2 decades in a grid defined by 7 streets by 7 streets in inner Melbourne, 7 north-south streets and 7 east-west streets. And in 2008, I began a project to try and determine whether I could reactivate the memory body, the tertiary world inside the grid, by walking along each of the 7 streets and re-immersing myself in the first 7 memories that arose as I walked along each street. Like most of my projects, there's no real conclusion, but there is a body of evidence that I can bring back from this kind of immersion into the structures that I propose. Each of the 7 north-south streets was defined by a colour, as were the 7 east-west streets, and indeed as were the first 7 memories that emerged as I walked along each street. The performance was videoed, and the video was exhibited at the Centre for Contemporary Photography in Fitzroy in 2008. I'm reading from Canning Street Memories. Canning Street is the 5th north-south street. Its colour is blue. This is the 3rd memory that emerged. Canning Street Plantation. When I returned to Australia on New Year's Day 1969, my parents and sister came to pick me up at Essendon Airport. I had disembarked at Fremantle after 30 days at sea and boarded my first flight ever. I must have been the only passenger on a New Year's Eve overnight flight from Perth to Melbourne, because I don't remember seeing anyone else on board. We drove home under grey skies on an early Sunday morning. The city seemed deserted. Eventually, I ended up standing outside my house in a state of shock. Soon enough, someone appeared with a footy, and the spell was broken. Everyone in those days kicked a football on any occasion. New Year's Day in Melbourne, January 1969. Though I ran around on the plantation, my limbs felt disjointed, each one heading in its own direction, refusing to take orders from headquarters. The sky above the Canning Street elms turned from grey to pink to baby blue. How misleading, I clearly remember thinking, like a baby-faced assassin with a seemingly sweet disposition, you conceal a cold interior, but you know I can feel your icy breath. But who was the you I was directing my thoughts to? I'm not sure. All I know is that since that day I have increasingly mistrusted the world of appearances, and I have not ever again been able to rejoice in a dawn sky in the way I did on that first day of 1969. "548 Canning Street. During early 1969, I would spend most days drawing in the top room in number 570. I had no money apart from what I earned through the odd casual labouring work. Whenever I did have some money, in order to buy something to eat, I would walk down to the milk bar at number 548. The shop owner was Greek, from the Peloponnese, I think. He was blonde and blue-eyed and spoke very quietly and slowly. He kept many Greek cheeses inside a glass-topped counter. My favourite was cassiri. He would very deliberately wrap a small piece of pale gold cassiri in a beautifully opaque wrapping paper. I would walk home carrying the precious parcel with great care and anticipation. Once upstairs, I would unwrap it and then break the cheese into small, irregular pieces. As I drew, I would ration myself over an hour or so, picking some bits and letting them rest in my mouth for a very long time, all the while savouring the salty aftertaste of goat's milk. For some reason, each time I kept the wrapping paper, smoothing it out as soon as I'd finished eating and placing it flat under a heavy pile of assorted drawing sheets. One evening I came across these collected fragments and I decided to draw on one. Eventually I used them all, beginning my drawings from the stains that the cheese had left in certain places, letting the hand move freely between these traces of the Peloponnese and beyond. The other day I was rifling through my drawers looking for something or other, and I unexpectedly found 2 of these drawings. I immediately wanted to sit down and close my eyes, but I somehow thought I didn't need to. I now know I was mistaken. Lived experience and memory and dream and lived experience and dream and memory all intersecting along the path of one single narrative, and those intersecting points are the points at which we become aware of these connections, the connection between the dream life and the real life, whatever that means. I think it means something different for each of us. A tertiary world is a little like this narrative. It contains the lived experience, fragments of it, certainly the memory, the inexact memory of that lived experience, and aspects of the dreams of each. What is its purpose? I hope its purpose is to perhaps activate something in each of you as you might hear these stories, much in the way that I search for a reactivation as I walked each of the 14 streets, a reactivation of the initial experiences. Did it happen? I can't remember. But there's no point to an answer to that question. Tomorrow I read some more accounts of my walk through Canning Street, and then I move on to Nicholson Street. I hope you have a peaceful night. And somewhere in my house, garden, or studio again tomorrow. Good night.